I actually like Dave Rubin. He's got a good head on his shoulders, and even though he self-identifies as a liberal, I think he makes a lot of good points. Not all of them, of course, otherwise I wouldn't be doing this video, but this video is a little bit different than some that I make, because I actually agree with some of the things he has to say. I just felt I had some things to expand on, and of course there are some things I disagree with here and there, but in the end, he makes a point that I've made before, and that I think is quite relevant and important. But you're going to have to wait for that one.
Do you believe in free speech?
Absolutely. Not only the freedom to speak your mind, but the freedom not to care if you offend someone with your free speech. And the realization that your own offense, should you suffer from that malady, is no cause for you to stop someone else from speaking their mind either.
Do you believe that people should be judged by their character, not their skin color?
Damn straight. In fact, skin color should be totally irrelevant in how we treat people and what rights and privileges they get. We should have a completely colorblind society where your skin color says absolutely nothing about the quality of your ideas.
Do you believe in freedom of religion?
Yes and no. You have the right to believe whatever you want in your head. In fact, it's literally impossible for anyone to stop you from believing whatever you want to believe. But there's a difference between religious belief and religious expression. While you can believe what you like, that doesn't mean that you can use your religious beliefs to act out in reality and suffer no potential negative ramifications for your actions. But this is going to come into play later on.
If you believe these things, you're probably not a progressive.
That's very much the case because modern progressives simply do not want freedom for all. They want freedom to push their ideas on everyone through force of law and social pressure.
You might think you're a progressive. I used to think I was. My show, The Rubin Report, was originally part of the Progressive Young Turks network.
And I bet you feel stupid for having done that, don't you? Glad you got out of that cesspool while the getting was good.
Progressives struck me as liberals, but louder. Progressives were the nice guys. They looked out for the little guy. They cared about women and minorities. They embraced change.
There's nothing wrong with any of that, to a certain degree. Of course, you can't have too much of a good thing, which is what the modern political left has become. They want change for the sake of change, not because there's any actual reason to change. They don't just embrace women and minorities, they put them up on a pedestal and worship them to the exclusion of all else. These people have problems.
In short, who wouldn't want to be a progressive?
Me. I know what you're describing as an ideal, but it's not the reality of what progressives have become.
But over the last couple of years, the meaning of the word progressive has changed.
No, it really hasn't. It's just become more obvious with the advent of the internet and social media, where these whining little obnoxious snowflakes have found a voice, and they've started to use it.
Progressives used to say, I may disagree with what you say, but I'll fight to the death for your right to say it.
I don't think actual progressives ever said that. Some liberals, yes. Progressives, no.
Not anymore. Banning speakers whose opinions you don't agree with from college campuses, that's not progressive. Prohibiting any words not approved of as politically correct, that's not progressive. Putting trigger warnings on books, movies, music, anything that might offend people, that's not progressive either. All of this has led me to believe that much of the left is no longer progressive, but regressive. This is one of the reasons I've spent so much time on my show talking about the regressive left.
As have I. But the fact is, I think this has been a problem for a lot longer than a lot of self-identified liberals want to admit. I think this has been an issue back into the late 60s or early 70s when you had people who rejected social norms and mores, not because there was anything demonstrably wrong with them, but because they existed. It was the era of, if it feels good, do it, without bothering to ask if you should actually do it. And this has been a problem for the left for a long time.
This regressive ideology doesn't judge people as individuals, but as a collective. If you're black or female or Muslim or Hispanic or member of any other minority group, you're judged differently than the most evil of all things, a white Christian male.
That's identity politics, and you can follow that all the way back to the 60s when it was first argued by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and extended by people like Barbara Smith and groups like the Black Panthers and MOVE. This has been going on for a very, very long time.
The regressive left ranks minority groups in a pecking order to compete in a kind of oppression Olympics. Gold medal goes to the most offended.
The gold medal and the most money because the regressives, like most of the political left these days, wants a government to hand out checks to anybody who they identify as oppressed.
Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream that his children would be judged by their character and not their skin color was a liberal idea, but these days it's not a progressive ideal.
Well, it was a liberal idea at a time when such things simply didn't happen in most areas of the United States. But today, regressives only care about skin color and gender and sexual orientation. That's all they pay any attention to. And as such, they've become the biggest racists and sexists and hate mongers around.
And what about religious freedom? The idea that no one else can tell you what you have to believe. Surely progressives still support that basic right. Well, not so much.
Literally nobody can tell you what you can or cannot believe in your own head. It's absolutely impossible for me to impose anything on you, or vice versa.
I'm a married gay man, so you might think that I appreciate the government forcing a Christian baker or photographer or florist to act against their religion in order to cater, photograph, or decorate my wedding. But you'd be wrong.
And here's where we disagree. There is a difference between an individual and a business that said individual might run. You could walk up to a random baker or photographer on the street and ask them to do something for you, and they'd have every right to tell you to go take a flying leap because they're an individual. But once they get a business license, once they start a legal business, they are bound by laws and rules that their own individual religious beliefs cannot override. You can't say that your religious views forbid you to pay minimum wage and get to ignore labor laws. You don't get to argue that your religion exempts you from following OSHA regulations. Too fucking bad. When you took out that business license, you obligated yourself to follow the law, even laws you don't personally like. We have non-discrimination laws on the books, whether the religious like it or not. If they own businesses, they have to follow them, whether they agree with them or not. If they have a problem, they can go out of business and simply operate as individuals, and the laws won't apply to them.
A government that can force Christians to violate their conscience can force me to violate mine.
They're not forcing Christians to violate anything. They're forcing individuals who voluntarily started businesses to be bound by the conditions of their licenses.
If a baker won't bake you a cake, find another baker. Don't demand that the state tell him what to do with his private business.
Businesses are not private. Businesses are public. When you open your doors to the public, you are bound by public accommodation laws. Welcome to reality.
I'm pro-choice, but a government that can force a group of Catholic nuns, literally called the Little Sisters of the Poor, to violate their faith and pay for abortion-inducing birth control can force anyone to do anything.
Which is totally irrelevant. Churches are businesses, and businesses follow the law. If the law requires a business to provide healthcare coverage, and you don't like some of the things that said coverage allows your employees to do, well, that's too bad. What they're really arguing is that they want to control the reproductive rights of their employees, which is not something that businesses are permitted to do in this country. Religious beliefs be damned.
That's not progressive, that's regressive.
No, actually in this case it's not. It promotes the greatest freedom to the most people where they cannot be held accountable to controls placed upon their actions by people who have no right to do so. Again, if a business, and a church remains a business like it or not, does not like the laws that they've agreed to follow as a consequence of holding a business license, they're welcome to go out of business and go work for someone else where their employers will be equally unable to control their actions either.
Today's progressivism has become a faux moral movement hurling charges of racism, bigotry, xenophobia, homophobia, Islamophobia, and a slew of other meaningless buzzwords at anyone they disagree with.
Just like the far religious right has, but they're equally liberal in their behavior, as I think we'll get to in a minute.
The battle of ideas has been replaced by a battle of feelings, and outrage has replaced honesty. Diversity reigns supreme as long as it's not that pesky diversity of thought.
And this is true of both sides of the political aisle. Nobody cares about freedom. They all want control.
This isn't the recipe for a free society. It's a recipe for authoritarianism.
Well, how do you think they plan on staying in power? That's what this is all about, after all. both sides want to control the narratives so they can control how people think and therefore how people vote. And both sides appeal to emotion because emotion gets in the way of intellectual evaluation of what they're actually saying, and both sides are terrified of that. That's why both the regressive left and the religious right are distinctly anti-intellectual. They only want you to be educated their way, so you only think what they want you to think, so you'll do what they tell you to do.
For these reasons, I can no longer call myself a progressive.
Well, you're halfway to sanity at least.
I don't really call myself a Democrat either.
And you're getting closer. Good job.
I'm a classical liberal, a free thinker. And as much as I don't like to admit it, defending my liberal values has suddenly become a conservative position.
That's because it's always been a conservative position. Classical liberalism is what we call modern conservatism. True constitutional conservatism has always had its roots in classical liberalism. But classical liberalism is not what modern liberals want. A lot of people simply don't recognize that the sides have swapped and actually continue to flip. Neoconservatives are mostly liberals today. They certainly have no interest in any of the things that classical conservatism espoused. They're purely economically liberal, and they just don't want to admit it.
So if you think people should be able to say what they think without being punished for it, that people should be judged by their behavior, not their skin color, and that people should be able to live the way that they want to live without government interference, then there's not much left on the left for you.
Or on the far right for that matter. Both sides are control mad. They don't care about freedom, which is why I keep saying that there aren't that many true conservatives left in this country, at least in mainstream political parties and their advocates. It's why I spent so much time frustrated with the direction of this nation, because there's nobody left on my side.
I'll keep trying to explain that to progressives until I'm totally left out.
Good luck, you're gonna need it. They won't listen because, as we both know, they operate on pure emotion and no intellect whatsoever. You can't reason with them any more than you can reason with the far-right religious zealots. All they care about is feeling good, and they lack the ability to step back and rationally evaluate the nonsense that they spew. And unfortunately, I don't see that changing anytime soon. And that's why everything I say falls mostly on deaf ears, because you have idiots on the left and idiots on the right, both shoving pencils in their ears so they can't hear anyone who disagrees. Now, it's good to know that there are people like Dave Rubin who've finally figured out that they've been running with a bad crowd, but it's honestly pretty hard to find a good crowd these days. With the confusion over what constitutes a conservative and what constitutes a liberal, I can see why people don't know if they're coming or going. That's why the ideological divide in this country is so extreme, because you've got the crazies on the fringes running the show, and because the people in the middle really have nowhere else to go. The political parties only have to cater to the crazies because they know the rest of us have no choice. Welcome to the modern world. I really don't know how any of us are going to survive it.